Welcome to If the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo. Don, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. You okay now?
I'm fine. I've recovered from Saturday. I'm used to some tough losses, like Bills fans are. Obviously,
Yeah.
Notre Dame fan. Talked it through with Marlon on our show. What happened
Yeah.
on Saturday with Marlon Kerner? It's Bills Miami week, Don.
Hey,
and
fish the fish.
I know you've told me over the years that there was a different feeling in the building when there was a big game. Different feeling in the building during the '90s whenever it was Miami, right?
Oh yeah, I mean it was Shula,
hate,
Marino,
genuine hate.
Yeah, it's fair to say that they were in the way. They were always good, and
they were better. They had big personalities. They had a Hall of Fame coach.
Yep,
you're right. They were always in the way. So we thought it might be fun to basically just look back at the '90s rivalry. We're going to leave the current stuff to the very capable hands of all the other Cover One guys. They're doing a great job covering, the Bills so far this year and with the upcoming matchup Sunday. Maybe take a little bit of a walk down memory lane in the '90s. So many big games, and then we'll finish it up with last year's trilogy of just epic Bills Dolphins rivalry being back.
It's back.
It's way back. Let's start even before the '90s.
Yep.
And we're going to start in 1980, September 7th, 1980. So during the Bills went 0 for the 70s against Miami. And I think older people clearly remember that. Younger people, it was even worse than Bills Patriots.
It's 0-20.
0-20.
Right.
Unbelievable. You lost and now the Bills had O.J. Simpson, Joe Ferguson. I mean, these, they were not bottom dwellers the entire length of the 70s. The Dolphins were amazing. They had the perfect season, 1972, all that. They were perennial Super Bowl contenders. They had Don Shula. But to lose 20 in a row,
it's unfathomable. And when you opened up the program, you talk about was it hate? So in the '90s, I had come just the tail end of the '80s. In 1990, it was a great time. I wish I could time my life in every aspect that way. But when you talk about hate, a lot of the Bills fan base still had scars from. For the 70s, 0-20. So, when Miami was good again, just when the Bills were good, it was a lot of that probably carried over. I didn't have the personal history of not having been here before that to understand, but I heard a lot about it. I heard a whole lot about it.
So it was the Patriots rivalry of the last 20 years, right? Way back then.
Yep.
To give you an idea, and this is pretty famous, and people can look it up. The Bills won 17-7. It was the opening game of the season, and the fans stormed the field. The fans stormed the field.
Regular
home opener.
Regular season game opener, of course.
I can't think of a reason or a way that would happen today.
It was just like, oh my gosh, we actually can beat this team. No, you're right. How I don't see it ever.
Ralph Wilson Jr. He said it's the biggest win this club's ever had
up until that point.
Sure, bigger than the AFL championships. I'd be happy to buy new goalposts.
Well, I don't think it was optional.
Right.
He had to buy them, yeah.
Think about that, though. He said it was bigger than any AFL championship, which at that time was only 15 years removed. Like, the fans stormed. I just can't get over the fact that the fans stormed the field for the home opener.
Well, I was a little late on this when you told me that we were going to have this conversation. It makes perfect sense because things are at fever pitch, as they should be. I think it's going to rival some of those games, this weekend and again the rest of the year. But Jerry Butler was a player on those teams, and in that game, and I've had a conversation with him about coming on. So hopefully before the Bills are going to, I imagine the Bills and the Dolphins this year are going to remain within a game of each other all year. And so that second game is going to be just as huge or even bigger.
That's the last game of the season.
Oh my gosh, that's right. So we will have him on
I want
to talk about playing in this game, because I don't know much about the game, but naturally snapping the over 20 streak.
And anytime the fans rush the field during the home opener, I think you got to get a little bit more clarification there. That's just truly unbelievable to me.
It really is. But too, when I was looking up some of those games in the 70s, the 72 Dolphins, the only team to ever go undefeated all the way through, including the Super Bowl. Everyone hears about Larry Zonka and Mercury Morris. They get together every year when that last undefeated team goes down. They have a drink. But there was a game in that 72 season that the Bills only lost by 1 point to them. O.J. Simpson had a big game. It was like 24-23. like it was that close to ruining their perfect season.
Wow.
But it didn't happen. But
That'd
still,
have been crazy if
yeah.
if OJ would have ended up murdering their perfect season. That'd have been
sorry.
sorry. All right, we're gonna
Wow.
move. I'm sorry. We're gonna move on.
Okay.
So during the '80s, obviously the rivalry kind of evens out a little bit. The Bills and the Dolphins go on their separate ways. The '88 season, the Bills make the AFC Championship game, lose to the Bengals. The opener of the '89 season is one of the more iconic Bills-Dolphins games of all time. It's the season opener.
Yep.
You know, those two were basically penciled in for 1 and 2 in the division. Dan Marino is established. Jim Kelly is now established. Like you said, they were in the way, and the Dolphins viewed the Bills the exact same way, in the way.
Yep.
And that game comes down to the final play. The Bills are down, I think, 13, or they were down 2 scores with like 4 minutes to go. They score, they get the ball back. Jim Kelly leads this epic drive down the field. Comes down to one play from the 2-yard line. And one of the more unlikely, it was unbelievable. One of the more unlikely outcomes, because Jim Kelly did not run the ball often at all. And do you remember, have we found out, was that called or was that him?
Boy, would it be great to ask him what was going through his mind.
It didn't look like it was a designed run. I can't imagine them calling QB draw for Jim Kelly.
No.
I think he just saw the formation and he saw an opening and he realized he was going to get in and he just took off and dove and
you
made
know,
it.
if the ball was at the 1 foot line,
sure,
you might think he was, he played linebacker in college, but he wasn't fast.
That wasn't his game at all.
No.
And it wasn't the NFL game back then either.
Right. I remember that game because I had just come back. My internship year was 88, 89. They asked me to come back part-time to see how it went. Ticket demand was through the roof. And I was watching the game in an apartment that we just got here, and I was so frustrated. The game just was not going well. And then finally, like you said, in the last 4 minutes, like, this is the Bills I know, but is there enough time? And that last play, oh my gosh, just to see when he makes the decision and he makes a little bit of a move and starts to charge ahead, and you can gauge the distance that he had to go and the momentum he had, like he's going to dive in and score.
It's one of the top 10. To me, it's one of the top 10 plays in Bills history.
Oh, yeah, easily.
And ironically, I'll never forget, the next day was my first day in high school at St. Joe's. So I was a freshman, and my first period class of A day was study hall. So my very first class in high school was a study hall, and clearly I had nothing to do. So I read the paper. I bought the Buffalo News, and I brought it in, and I read everything, Larry Felser, Vic Carucci, about that game. And that's just a very vivid memory for me because I took 45 minutes, and I was reading about that game. And famously, Marv Levy is fired up after that. You remember he runs from the sideline into the dog pile in the end zone, pumping his fists. And wow. you got to look at that again.
Yeah, I don't remember that. Yeah.
He looks young and he looks spry, and he is. That's as much emotion as I've ever, that you'll ever see out of Marv during any game, any highlight. Well, like just fired up.
I just think about how big it is because first of all, it kind of laid an egg until that last, and the game was so big because you knew it was going to come down to those two teams, and that's what makes these Miami games so big now, the way things are lined up, because they would say for the division it's like a two, how is that, at least it's like a game and a half because a tiebreaker comes in. Well, you give them a loss, you get a win. It's the
same situation as this Sunday,
right? Where
if the Dolphins win, they have a 2.5
game lead,
and otherwise the Bills are up a half a game,
right?
So it's really a 3-game swing.
There you go.
Yeah,
and so Marv had to feel, the whole team had to feel like they stole a game, but not just any game.
They stole that game.
They did.
They did not. They didn't quote unquote deserve to win that game.
No.
That was Miami's game, and that felt like, even though the '88 team went to the AFC Championship game, that team was carried by the defense, the Blizzard defense, and all that. That felt like Jim Kelly's first real, I guess, superstar moment. Where nationally it's like, oh, okay, this guy is, all he was cracked up to be, and he won it in Miami where he went to college.
Right.
Like that was his moment. It felt like
so clutch.
Yeah, so clutch. So we'll move on to 1990, and there are 2 games in the 1990 season that will live with Bills fans. The first one is the regular season game where they ended up winning the division, And famously, Jim Kelly is hurt, and Frank Reich comes in. Frank Reich had come in '89 for a 3-game stretch, was a serviceable backup, but he was not yet Houston Oiler comeback Frank Reich.
No.
And this was a big regular season game in December in Buffalo.
The biggest, the week before against the Giants in a nasty cold rain. Jim Kelly went down. It was a low scoring game.
Bills won.
Frank kept the ship. But this was the game against Miami that was going to determine not only the division, but the seeding in terms of
home field
advantage. And
I can't stress enough to people who weren't old enough or don't remember, Frank was not Frank yet.
No.
He was a game manager. It was like one of these guys who'd come in. Now, he was kind of viewed like Todd Collins or, just one of these guys. Hey, don't lose the game for us, Frank.
Right.
Maybe we can do enough with Thurman in the defense. Just don't lose the game.
Don't lose it. Yeah, move the sticks.
And you're facing Dan Marino.
Don't turn it over. Yeah, and he was almost, they say you look up a game manager in the dictionary. At the time, he was that guy. The rest of the team had all the pieces in place and the coaching. And but that's not to say, it's can't make it sound easy because it wasn't again. And it was just so big. The game, the regular season game, I don't recall.
It's not as memorable as the playoff game.
Right.
The stakes were high, and Frank being the quarterback made it even, a little bit dicier. The playoff game is the game that everybody remembers. The weather was okay in the first half.
Yeah.
Second half, the field becomes snow covered.
Yep.
Andre Reed killed the Dolphins in that game.
Yeah.
And there's a clip of him scoring a touchdown early in the game. And the turf back then was terrible, right? At the stadium.
Oh yeah.
And there was a hole.
Yeah.
And there was like a patch of different colored turf on the AstroTurf. And he runs over, and it just caught my eye when I was looking these things up last night, how bad that field was for turf in 1990.
Well, it's funny you say that too, because at that time in my career, I was still very young in my career. I had no idea how long it was going to end up being there. So I was opportunistic in a way that I tried to get my family and friends to come to some games. And if I played it right and they came for a weekend, I would take them on Saturday to the stadium.
Okay.
And we would go out there. You work it out with security, and they were always
did
real
the
nice
Bills
about it.
do
Lieutenant Will Boiler.
Oh, well, how could you have ever gotten by him?
Yeah.
Did they do the walkthroughs on the stadium turf?
Yeah.
Back then? Okay.
Saturday mornings. Yeah.
There's no field house yet. It was the bubble.
Right. Just the bubble was like a 30-yard field. So they were out there. But, when they were gone, we would go out in the field, and especially in the wintertime. And my family and friends would always comment. I'm like, this is hard as a rock.
Yes.
Like you looked at it and you think, it's got to be softer than it looks. No.
And then it got frozen.
Oh,
right?
yeah. It was.
And then there is a patch of it that it looks like Fix-A-Flat. Like they literally put a different patch of AstroTurf that wasn't faded yet.
Right.
Like the rest of the field. And it's just incredible. So, that game, shootout, the Bills get up early. 44-34. Bills get up early, never relinquish the lead. The snow comes in the second half. Jim Kelly was back for that game, which is ironic because that happens again 2 years later in another game we're going to talk about. So the offense that year put up 95 points in 2 playoff games.
Well, yeah.
The team did.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. And the game that we've talked about so much. I mean, the Miami game led to the AFC Championship game, the infamous 51-3 game. But
do you remember when you were there? So, okay, so where did you watch that Miami playoff game, the first one?
I was in the ticket office. It was torture. Until almost the end of the first quarter.
Settling up like will call.
All
right. How many people? Let me ask you this.
Horrible.
Let me ask you this.
Because we had a TV behind me, and I was hearing it. I was just like, please, let's get
were there still a lot of people outside the stadium after kickoff, waiting for tickets?
Well, problems. That was the worst of it. You were dealing with problems.
Oh, and you're trying to watch this game, and there are irate people that want to get in the stadium.
Yeah. So they were good enough to give us 2 tickets to watch the game in a really good area outside in the stadium. So we had to bring
better than what Tequila Spikes got.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Well, he was in a suite, but that didn't look like a very good vantage point right there. But we were going to go out into the stadium to watch the game. We'd throw on new clothes because we were in dress clothes. and I was just chomping at the bit to get out there. And
well, that's like the slow water torture, right?
It was
wow. So the problems are over. You get to go sit in the stands and watch the rest of the game.
At that point, those years,
What'd you do after the game?
Did
you just hang around the administration building, or did you have to go back to the ticket office and start selling tickets for the Raiders?
We would go back in the ticket office. They always had food.
Sure.
Yeah. And then wait for the crowd to, wait for the traffic to dissipate. We won so much, so many games back then. It was always a celebration. It was odd if we didn't win.
Sure, of course.
And it was terrible.
Were you guys allowed to kind of mingle in like the administration building?
Oh yeah.
As a ticket. Okay, so because it was such a small organization then, right?
Yep.
Wow.
You remember it. You were
what a great time.
Yeah, we were. The term gets tossed around a lot, but we were a family there in the ticket office. Yeah.
So then you're going to the AFC Championship game. You're going to have it at home.
Yeah.
And I believe that game was the Saturday game, so that the Raiders Cincinnati game where Bo Jackson got hurt was the next day. Correct. No, you know what? I got that mixed up. That's the wrong year.
Okay.
That's the wrong year. No, wait. No, it is.
No, it was 90. It was 90 when he got hurt.
Because then they won. They beat Cincinnati and came here, but they were without him.
They were loaded. Yeah, Marcus Allen, Howie Long. It was scary. It was funny to think now when you know the result of the next game. But
that Bills-Dolphins game, like that was the build-up for that. The playoff game at home against them.
Yep.
The weather, everything about it was like the perfect game.
Yep. And well, right. And you talk about it's hard to beat a team 3 times in a season, but it wasn't the case because of the week 2 in 1990.
Right.
Miami killed us.
We're going to talk about another one of those. So go through the 91 season. Bills obviously make it back to the Super Bowl. 1992, week 5, Dolphins at Bills. 37-10.
Oh.
The Dolphins waxed us. Louis Oliver, 2 pick sixes?
3. Oh, well, maybe 2 pick sixes. You got 3 picks.
Okay, and I have to say, if you're ranking, who were your 3 least favorite Dolphins of all time? Brian Cox is obviously up there.
Yeah. He had redemption.
God, I hated so many. Duper, Clayton.
Oh, man.
Brian Cox. Louis Oliver was so annoying. He was another one with the hands in the air and every play. John Offerdahl.
Yeah, they had Keith Jackson.
Keith Jackson killed the Bills until Henry Jones got there.
Killed Keith Byers. Yeah, you're right.
Keith
Henry
Byers.
Jones neutralized him.
But do you know who my least favorite Dolphin of all time was? And this is going to make you laugh.
I might know it. It could be this. Go ahead.
Running back / fullback, third down specialist, Jim Jensen.
I'm with you.
Dude, that dude drove me crazy.
Number 11.
He had like the neck thing before Brian Cox had it. He looked like he shouldn't be playing NFL football.
Wasn't he like their 3rd string quarterback too?
Yes.
Maybe.
Yes. Yeah. He was like the Taysom Hill.
Exactly.
And it would be 3rd and 7, and he would leak out of the backfield, and he'd get 8 yards.
Who is this guy?
He was on a field with Duper, Clayton, Marino, Keith Jackson, all of these, the Bruce Smith, Darryl Talley. This dude.
Yeah, he looked like he could be delivering your UPS package.
Correct. He drove me insane.
The big heads thing too.
He drove me nuts. He's my least favorite Dolphin of all time. But there's a lot of guys from the 90s. Hopefully, people listening to this just have
there's
an
names
idea.
Flying around.
There's names flying around, and God, they just drove me. And obviously, Marino was so unlikable.
Oh yeah, he was irritable. He was so great. It was frustrating because he was so immobile, yet was sacked so infrequently.
Right. I guess for people, for people listening to us now who don't remember those games, he was a completely different player, but he had like that Patrick Mahomes vibe of you could never just get him. Like you couldn't get him on the ground.
Right.
He would always make the play. Like Patrick Mahomes is much more likable than Dan Marino, even as an opponent. You respect Patrick Mahomes, you fear him, he drives you nuts. But at the end of the day, you probably wouldn't mind having a beer with him.
Sure.
Maybe now Dan Marino's different. Dan Marino would yell at his own teammates. He would embarrass his own offensive line. He would throw a hissy fit at the refs and at his own team. The guy's ball. I hated everything about him.
Yeah, when you're a quarterback and a superstar quarterback, you just know that after every play, good or bad, the TV camera is on you.
Correct. Yes.
And he, we kind of saw that with Diggs last year.
Right. No, Dan Marino, always made a point to be blaming someone else.
Yep. Oh, the eye roll.
Yes. And as a Bills fan and as a Bills employee, he drove you crazy.
Yeah, his numbers were ridiculous. He set the NFL record for most touchdowns passes in a season, right?
Yep.
It was just, oh my gosh.
And there were so many unlikable players on their defense too.
Yeah.
There really were. I mean, Oliver and Cox and the defensive line. Oh God, they just had so many guys on that team that you really truly disliked.
Yeah, even guys that seemed like nice guys, like Bernie Parmalee.
Sure.
Was this just all-purpose back that did everything good. He seemed like a really good guy, but I hate that guy.
Keith Jackson. That's a name.
Jackson,
he just killed him.
Yeah.
So 37-10, the Bills lose in 92. And like you just said, it was a shock when they lost at home in the early 90s.
It was a shock.
I mean, what was it like in the building? What was it like after a game like that?
It was a funeral, exaggeration, of course, but it's just, you just look around and everybody's shell-shocked, and especially with the score being that lopsided, you want to believe that there was some fluky element to it. I remember Oliver had 3 picks.
Well, that alone,
yeah,
that's all you really need.
Yeah, but you don't remember if they were tipped balls or they were just genuinely.
I remember they beat the heck out of the Bills that day.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean,
you came away from that game and you're like, wow.
Yeah.
Because if you lose, okay, but they got dominated.
And there was no reason to think that team was in the back end of their window. I mean, these guys were just
right, and
all were such in their prime.
And this was a couple weeks after the famous no punt game in San Francisco.
Oh, right.
So they were still were still great.
Yep.
It's just they laid an egg that day.
Just laid an egg.
They laid an egg.
Yep.
Later on that season, the Bills go down to Miami for Monday Night Football.
Okay.
And I don't know if you remember this one, 26-20 Bills.
Okay.
On Monday Night Football.
I don't remember specifically. I'm going to predict, going way out on a limb here, that Thurman Thomas had an awesome game.
Thurman Thomas. So if you're okay, let's say you're in Miami right now, and you're doing this exact.
Oh, I love where you're going with this.
Who do you think would be the 3 most hated Bills if you and I were doppelgangers and we were Miami Dolphins ex-employees and fans and all the rest? It's got to be Thurman Thomas, number 1. Not personally, he killed them.
He destroyed them
over and over and over, and much more than Jim Kelly, much more than Andre Reed, much more than the defense.
Yep, on the ground, through the air.
And I'll tell you what, I know who their Jim Jensen is. It's Jeff Wright.
Oh yeah,
like this dude, nose tackle, mullet. How is he the guy who's the Dan Marino whisperer and gets all the sacks? Like, Jeff Wright has to be the guy if you're a 90s Dolphins fan. It's like, oh, you got to be kidding me. This guy?
We somehow made Jeff Wright look like Mark Gastineau.
Right. Like, you got Bruce Smith.
I'm sorry. I just saw a commercial with Mark Gastineau.
Really?
He was unrecognizable. He looked, put it this way, feeble in a way. I didn't recognize him.
I didn't even know he was still alive, to be honest with you.
I couldn't believe they put him on TV. Anyone out there that knows what I'm talking about, he's on some commercial with his wife. Oh my gosh, it was hard to watch.
Wow. I don't know.
Anyway, that's a TV. And I remember Pete Metzlars was proud that he and I think he said Butch Roll, when Gastineau made a comeback in the NFL, blocked him so hard that he quit again the next day. But anyway, we're talking about the Dolphins here. And yes, they would hate Thurman. They would hate Jim Kelly. He had swagger.
Sure.
Bruce Smith. They had this Pro Bowl left tackle in Richmond Webb and Bruce.
Richmond Webb.
Yep.
Yeah, God, all these names.
Yeah.
That's funny. So then that all leads up to, so it's 1-1. That all leads up to January of 93, AFC Championship game in Miami. After the Bills famously win the comeback game, go to Pittsburgh the next week, grind out a win there with Frank. Do you remember, and I don't know if we've talked about this or not, I think we did. Would you have started Frank or would you have started Jim in the Miami game? That was a big thing.
It had to be one heck of a discussion. I can only imagine it went something like this, that Marv, and to whatever extent Bill Polian would have had to say in it, but it would have been Marv's call. Maybe
it wasn't the owner's call like it was later in the decade.
Right. Well, who knows? You're right. It could have been, but that they were leaning Frank. And I have a feeling, I don't know this for sure, but I can imagine this happening from being in the building, that Jim Kelly told him, basically said, I am playing.
This is my team.
I am playing, and not to take anything away from Frank. They were best friends, so compatible in so many ways. But
if you play Frank in that game and you win, Frank has to play the Super Bowl.
Oh my God.
Right?
Was there
Jim
a
Kelly,
week or 2 weeks between?
Two.
I don't know.
But if Jim Kelly's healthy enough to play and doesn't play,
yeah,
and you win,
yeah.
If you can't take Frank Reich out before the AFC Championship game, and he goes to Miami and wins it, how do you take him out for the Super Bowl? Good. Oh my gosh. How could I don't know. I don't think that game is any different.
I had a terrible feeling about that Miami game. I just thought, in a way, retrospectively, looking back at last year's Bills and how they just appeared to have nothing left in the tank against Cincinnati. You were there.
That's very interesting you say that. Yeah, the Cincinnati game felt flat.
Yeah.
It felt like they were just shot. It felt like they were done. And you're right. After the comeback game, I think the thing that helped was that they won the next week in Pittsburgh. It felt like that Pittsburgh game was going to be I mean, that's the ultimate letdown spot after you have the comeback game. And the Pittsburgh game was on a Saturday.
Yep.
So I think it was a 6-day turnaround, and they grind that game out.
Even there, Pittsburgh had Frank was just typical, don't mess it up, manage the game. Frank
almost threw a pick six.
Well, he was now Super Frank after that.
Right,
of course, the pick six, you felt like you dodged a bullet there.
Yes.
Of course, like that would have been.
Now you guys went to that game as employees, right? You took a bus. The Pittsburgh game.
I was at my best friend's wedding in Washington D.C.
Oh man!
And I spent a good part of it in the kitchen.
Were you expected to go to a road game like that or no?
I did, because we all did that in Cleveland in '89 for the Ronnie Harmon game.
So you were watching the playoff game in the kitchen of a banquet hall.
I had to give a speech. This is my best friend, and he understood. He's like, "Oh my gosh, of course I was going to be there." It was in Georgetown, and Amy and I were there, and I must have gotten up 6 or 8 times because I was told they have this little teeny TV in the kitchen of this hotel.
And this is like way before cell phone.
Oh yeah, and they were nice enough to say. I think someone said, "Hey, this guy actually works for the team." I'm sure he's thinking, "What is he doing here?"
Sure,
but they were nice enough to. I just popped my head in and I'm like, "Score!"
That's torture.
Yeah.
So then, obviously, you've told the story on the show many times that you were not in Miami for the AFC Championship game. You were dog sitting for Brad Lamb, who ended up coming in and having a successful reverse where Andre was supposed to be in. And Brad tells the story, funnily, that Jim Kelly had no idea that it was me, Brad Lamb, coming around the corner.
Looking for an 83, you saw it on 81. But he was still so deep in the play, he just went with it, and Brad got a nice
gain
16-yard gain or something. Yeah.
So what was it like after that game? You beat the Dolphins to go to the Super Bowl. Do you feel like it meant any more that A, you won it on the road, and B, you beat the Dolphins to go to the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I did. I had a bad feeling about the game, but that might be one of those games that Marchibroda wasn't there anymore, right? Was it Tom Bresnahan?
No, I think he was still there.
Was he still there?
I believe so.
If it was him, I just remember thinking it was a brilliant game plan.
Jerry Ostrowski told us that it was left screen, right screen.
They
ran
long.
like 12, and Thurman just
was unstoppable.
Carved them up.
Yep.
Because Miami was so jacked up and over pursued, and Tom Olivadotti was there,
coordinator, right.
And they would over pursue everything. That was kind of what they were known for, is how aggressive they were, hyper aggressive on defense, and it was a brilliant game plan to just isolate Thurman out, and he killed him.
And I just remember these screens were not screens where he was taking them to the outside and outrunning people. He was cutting back toward the middle, which speaks to your over pursuing and just getting huge chunks of
Mickey
yards.
Washington had a big interception in that game. He did not make our list of the 30 best DBs of the modern era, but Mickey Washington had to play in that game. Okay. There was that was quite a game. So what happened after that game? Like when you went back the next day to Rich Stadium?
We went back to the office and we were preparing for a Super Bowl in Pasadena. And as pessimistic as I felt about that Miami game, and being pleasantly surprised at the outcome, now we have Jim Kelly back. This Cowboys team,
they upset San Francisco.
They did. They upset San Francisco, but they were so young. There was like, it's not their time yet.
Everyone,
it's our time.
I
now.
remember really wanting Dallas to win.
Yeah, I was happy
you wanted to avoid that San Francisco team.
Woo.
You know, they had won 4 Super Bowls at the time, and you wanted to avoid them. That was still, you know, Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and all that. So you're like, oh man, this young Dallas team goes in there and wins.
Yep.
We're good.
Yeah, we're set up nicely here.
And we were the team of destiny.
Yep.
And you know, oh my God, the comeback game and this, that, and the other thing. You felt like
yep. And then we come out and Steve Tasker blocks a punt. Thurman Thomas takes it in. We're up 7-0. Here we go, and then the wheels fell off.
All right, so we're gonna continue rolling along in the 90s here, and we can kind of skip ahead to 1995.
Yeah,
where there was the same kind of setup as 1990, where they play him early in Miami and then they play late in Buffalo. And anybody who's around back then knows this is the David White game.
Yeah,
he had that big interception late to clinch the division for the Bills. Another one of those, winner is going to take the division late in Buffalo.
Exactly. And I hope, you know, you're talking about these Dolphin games spanning now basically the same team, same nuclei from 90. Now we're at 95, same teams that, you know, for this current Bills team and the Dolphins, it looks like it could be another, you know, 5-6 year deal that would have started kind of last year. But yeah, here we are. It was the same cast of characters: Marino, Shula. We still had Kelly, Thurman, but they were coming here, and I just remember running the ball like crazy. Went up. We're talking about the playoff game.
No,
right?
the regular season game.
The regular season game.
Those two games kind of blend together.
They really do,
because they were what, a week, 2 weeks apart, 1 week apart.
Yeah. You're right. So the regular season game, David White stands out.
Correct. It was
as sealing the game with a picker. Like, who was this guy?
Yes, right. Who was David White? Like, David White was just random player.
Yeah.
The playoff game is the game where Tim Tyndale has that famous run up the middle, and Brent Musburger calls him the Canadian Flash, but I think he was the Canadian Comet.
Yeah.
The Bills ran for 200 and something. It was Don Shula's last game as coach, correct?
Yeah, and they fired Olivadotti. I think he got roasted.
That was one where they kind of got embarrassed.
Well, just couldn't stop the run. But I remember, I think, and I read this when we were doing our prep work. Most of this is by memory, but I refreshed myself a little bit. That we were up 27-0, and then in the fourth quarter, Miami scored 22 straight points.
Yeah,
it's 27-22, and I'm like, no,
it got close.
And I think Marino uncharacteristically had a scramble where, like, we were watching it there in person, but if you were watching it on TV, he would have been the only person on the screen.
Right.
I could look. It might have been a 2-yard run, but he faked everybody out,
like the Doug Flutie.
Yes, exactly like that. Yeah, but even more wide open. Like,
so then, you know, the Bills go to Pittsburgh the next week. Bruce Smith doesn't play because he has the flu, and we lose. That was another one where, boy, that Dallas team was beatable in the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
Pittsburgh ended up going to the Super Bowl. So the rivalry kind of grinds on. 96, 97. We get to 1998. Doug Flutie. You know, they play here early. They play there later on, and then there's the playoff game in Miami. We've talked about this game, and I want to ask you this: you made me a list of the 3 worst bus rides in the NFL, and you had Jacksonville, right? Miami and Oakland.
Oakland and New England.
Oh, in New England. Yeah. What was the bus ride like for Miami?
It was long. You mean in general?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was long because they played in Davies, Florida, and we usually stayed a good half hour away for some reason, just because that's where the hotels were that had the meeting room space that we needed. And
the stadium is not near either Fort Lauderdale or Miami.
Right. No, and you've done this.
Yeah,
you've made this trip.
It's on the western side of the whole area there.
Yeah, so you're out on the freeway, and everyone knows who you are because you have a police escort. Everyone knows that's the team bus. So all around. There were plenty of Bills fans too, but still the cars would know, and they would do these things where they would come up to the side of the bus and middle fingers, all of that. They would purposely get in front of the motorcade to try to slow us down, and then it got worse when we got into the parking lot because there was hate. Now it was a good kind of hate, if that makes sense, not horrible stuff you're seeing now on TV about so many other team fans are having these fights and horrible things are happening. It never rose to those levels, at least much that we saw, but the visual, the yelling, screaming, swearing, mooning.
Yeah, and it's a long ride to the stadium. It was a pain in the ass to get there.
It really was long.
Yeah, and so the '98 playoff game. When I was reading about this, I forgot Jimmy Johnson made it really personal against Doug Flutie.
Yeah, well,
remember they stomped on the Flutie Flakes when the game was over.
I think they did it before the game.
Really randomly, during the week. I don't quite know what Doug Flutie ever did to Jimmy Johnson. Well, except
go back to college.
Maybe it was that, but it was weirdly personal. And Doug had one of the most roller coaster games ever. Eric Moulds had 240 yards receiving, which is a playoff record. But then he also had a ton of turnovers.
Yeah, and
that was a game you felt like the Bills left on the table. When you have a receiver having that many yards, Eric Moulds was completely unstoppable in that game. Somehow you still lose.
First play of the game, came down to a 4th and goal, or maybe just time. One play left from the 2 or something, and Jerry Ostrowski was on with us and remembers that a very fresh Trace Armstrong, because he only had to play 12 plays, and he was right, busted through and sacked Flutie for that was frustrating.
It was a weird flex from Jimmy Johnson. And then I remember being soothed the next week when they got curb stomped by the Jaguars. I think it was 62-10.
Yes,
I believe it was
7 or 10.
Yeah,
I enjoyed every second of that
game. And Jimmy Johnson had a coat on, and I just remember it was just such a weird flex. If you want to say you hate the Bills or whatever else, but he made it personal with Doug Flutie, and it was just odd.
I think my recollection was in practice leading up to the game during the week, like Wednesday or Thursday, he took a whole bunch of Flutie Flake boxes and stamped on them, ripped them apart. And what's odd is he had to have known, I apparently didn't care, that the whole Flutie Flakes thing was done for charity.
Yeah,
I don't know. It worked. I mean, they won.
Jimmy Johnson was the perfect person to replace Don Shula if you wanted to continue to hate the Dolphins.
There's some hate I had that dated back from when it beat us with the Cowboys. And
of course. Yeah. If you were going to pick the perfect coach to be the villain to continue that rivalry, it was Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah,
of course it was.
Yeah.
He beat you with the Cowboys twice, and he was just, even going back to college, and he was the guy who ushered in the U and the swagger and all that. And boy, that next weekend, it was always hard when the Bills lost in the playoffs to watch the next weekend's playoff games. Even going into current Bills. But boy, that was satisfying watching Jacksonville. They killed them.
That was delicious.
That was really nice.
Yeah.
So we go from there. The '99 season, both teams are still good, and then it kind of falls off a cliff for a long time. Yeah. You had a game that you mentioned from 2002.
Yeah,
that stood out.
So Bledsoe was his first year, and he was putting up really, really good numbers in that first year. He's looking like the Bledsoe we thought we were going to, getting, Eric Moulds or Peerless Price. They both have monster games. Going into the game, we were confident, and it was regular season. It was early December, but I think I want to say we were 6-6
in the hunt.
6-6.
In the hunt,
they were 6-6. Something like that. Maybe they were 7-5. The Jets were it was right there. Again, you get this win, and you feel like you're going to be in the driver's
little
seat.
Did you know that you had 15 more years in the hunt. You didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah,
some weren't even in the hunt.
2002, Don Purdy did not know what was in store for him in the hunt.
What would I tell myself if I could go back and say, you sure?
Move to Foxborough and get hired by the Patriots.
Yeah, right. Oh, my gosh.
That's funny.
But Ricky Williams, famously, all week we had heard, he never played in the snow.
I remember that.
Never played in the snow. Oh, well, how? And he just shredded us.
Yeah.
He had 200 yards rushing, or like 150 in the first half or something crazy. But it was back and forth, and then I think it was Molds or Peerless Price had these long. Peerless Price had a really good catch where he sort of wrestled it away.
That offense is fantastic.
Yeah, and we won the game, and it felt good. I think it started kind of like last year's game. It started snowing, and the scoreboards played "Let It Snow, Let It Snow," and it was fun.
Yeah,
and wish it would have meant more. At the time, it was big, but it couldn't.
The rivalry takes about a 15-year nap.
That's right.
After that,
Yeah.
Did it, like when you were the director of football administration? Did it ever feel like Bills Miami?
No, and that was the thing. Like when we're in a hunt, they're in a hunt, and it lost. It was amazing how much luster it lost. And I remember like trying to tell people that were new in the building, trying to explain to them like how big a week Miami week always was, and you weren't feeling it.
You know what it reminds me of now? It's Red Sox Yankees.
Yeah. Gosh.
Like now
what's up with that?
It's like
that's
we don't talk Red Sox Yankees at all.
Not a good call.
Whereas 15 years ago it was like a blood feud. That's
a great comparison.
Because Bills Dolphins back then, at least the people here and in Miami, was as big, maybe not nationally, but it was as big as Red Sox Dolphins or I'm sorry, Red Sox Yankees or any other like major rivalry.
Yeah, I would. It's fun to think about how much Dolphin fans would have hated us because Kelly, Shula, Marino, it was like we were 17-5 or something like that.
and it's funny. It feels like to me that is now Chiefs Bills. The Chiefs have not knocked them out in 2020 and 2021, and you're right. Like the Bills were the team that the Dolphins could never get past. Like the Dolphins did not make the Super Bowl
in the regular season. Some
sure, yep, and the Bills have won in Kansas City twice. So the Dolphins would win games,
sure,
but they never won the games that mattered. 98 was a little bit different, and that was after Jim Kelly and Marv Levy. But it feels a little Bills Chiefs like. Okay. That brings us to 2017, and I hate to bring up this memory for you. The last game of the regular season, Kyle Williams scores a touchdown.
That's right,
and the Bills were in Miami when Tyler Boyd scores and makes the playoffs. I know that's
we've talked. It's got both. You asked me last time we talked, was I happy for them? Yeah, absolutely.
Right, but they were for them. Ironically, the Bills were in Miami, and there's always those shots of all the fans in the concourses of whatever in the world they name their stadium now, whatever.
Yeah, and I'm not proud of the little pity party I was having for myself of
on New Year's Eve.
Now
on New Year's Eve.
Oh, come on, really?
You must have been quite a vision that night. But so the Bills won that game, and I think they went into the game with a 5% chance of making the playoffs. They had to have a bunch of things happen.
Yeah,
and then as the day went on, you realized, oh wow, this could happen. And then it happened, and I'm like,
it was in Baltimore. Some other teams had to lose, and they all did.
No, well, Baltimore lost to Cincinnati.
I'm sorry, they were in.
But then there was a couple other things that had to happen too,
right?
And they did. So ironically enough, that's another interesting nugget. Then you fast forward to last year, and I feel like last year is where the rivalry just basically went back to where it's the first time it felt like, and I think we sat here talked about this. It felt like the 90s last year.
It did, yeah.
It felt, and it started with the game early there in the heat. They have a clear advantage there. The opposing sideline being directly in the sun for the entire game. They redid the stadium, and they kept that. And I think that's a rule that's an advantage the NFL can and should eliminate.
Well, it's funny because when we had Andy Major on, VP of relations with the Bills, and he kindly came on our program and gave us almost kind of the first public insight about the way the stadium is being designed. And we asked him, and I didn't know if he'd answer the question, if there were home field advantage elements being thought about, considered openly, and he said yes. And that's the game I had in mind when I was thinking of hopefully what the Bills are going to do.
I guess the difference there, and people will argue, oh, well, the Dolphins come here in the wind and there's snow. Both teams have to deal with the snow.
Right.
The Dolphins sideline is fully shaded.
That's
not an accident.
No, that's probably a 15-degree difference.
Yeah, I personally think that's an advantage that the NFL should and could eliminate. So the Dolphins win that game there. There's the famous, image of Josh Allen kind of collapsing into Tua's arms after the game, and Tua had the concussion that they called a back injury and all that. So then the rematch here in December, I was at that game. That was the picture perfect.
Yeah.
Good weather for 3 quarters, snow in the 4th quarter.
Somebody
we had Pat
turned on the snow machine.
We had Patrick Hammer on, and he's like, we kept waiting for the snow.
Yeah, right.
And everything in that. That's the game. The second game after the Dolphins win here or there. That's the game that it felt like, man.
It did.
And the Miami coach is absolutely hateable. He made a big deal about the snow.
Your mother-in-law.
My mother-in-law. Yes. I can't repeat the words that my mother-in-law uses for that man. She accuses him of terrible crimes that he did not commit. But he's an unlikable. He you know what? I give him all the respect in the world. I think he's a fantastic coach.
Yeah.
But man, he is easy to root against.
There's
my 10-year-old son says he has a punchable face.
It's something about him that he appears to be breaking unofficial stereotype rules.
Yes, that's part of it. That is part of it. He does not look like
successful.
He does not look like a football coach at all. He doesn't talk like a football coach. He's a little weird. He's a little odd.
Yeah.
But he's clearly brilliant.
Yeah.
And he has them in his offense is designed brilliantly. I admire the job he's done fitting, his offense to the talent that he has. So then, the Bills pull that game out late.
Yeah.
Late, instant, a review on a Josh Allen touchdown. And then you get to the third game.
Yeah,
you got the playoff game.
String quarterback.
And Tua's out.
Yep.
And they were game in that game. And that's after the Damar Hamlin thing. That's after the emotional week, the week after against New England. And I do feel like that's the game that kind of took it out of the Bills.
I felt the same thing because they should have won that game handily against the third-string quarterback. And I remember thinking
they were sloppy.
It shouldn't be that difficult. Yeah, they had a lead. They gave it up in all phases of the game. You talk about Miami's coach. I got the evil eye from my daughter because we were talking about what they just did to Denver. And I brought up the fact that we were both walking out the door one morning a couple days ago. And I said to her, Miami could have set the NFL record for points in a game, but he chose, not to kick the field goal. And she was like, stop trying to make me like him.
Yeah.
I said, oh, I'm not. I'm not. But I said, and she goes, that was kind of cool, but no, I can't like him.
He's great for the Bills-Dolphins rivalry.
Yes, he is.
Because I have a feeling on the other end that Miami fans don't have hate for Sean McDermott. He's real vanilla.
Yeah.
He doesn't give you much material either way to really love him or to hate him. So if you're a fan of an opposing team, I don't think you really have strong feelings about Sean McDermott either way.
No, and then you look at the other Bills rivals too, like Andy Reid is hard to hate.
Correct.
Yes, and then Zach Taylor,
the Cincinnati coach, was
showed such class,
right?
And he's sort of just vanilla.
Yes.
This guy's this.
There's Belichick.
Right.
There's Belichick.
Darth Vader, sure.
Robert Saleh in New York is unlikable.
Yeah.
And then there's Mike McDaniel.
And McDaniel's he created this character of himself as this genius.
Yes.
Guy, and it's working.
Yes. I'm glad he's part of the rivalry.
Yeah, it makes it
because
fun.
This game here feels like what an early season Bills Dolphins.
Yeah,
like this is 1990 all over again. Josh Allen against Tua, like man.
Yeah, or 91 or 92. All
sure.
That's 90 to 95 kind of window. They're all.
I'm going to make a prediction to you.
Okay.
All right. I think, and we did this for the 1990 season, and we our parallel.
Okay.
I think that this is going to mirror the 92 season.
Oh my God!
My prediction is that the Bills play the AFC Championship game in Miami.
I can't believe you beat me to that.
Really?
I've thought about this leading up to the season, and darn it, you went on record first with it. That because I heard Steve Tasker say that you need to be great to get into the playoffs, very good or great to get in the playoffs, but you have to play well on that day. It sounds overly simplistic, But I thought to myself, last year was the opposite of that. They did not play well. Even the Miami game, they were kind of lucky to win, but certainly came out flat against Cincinnati. Talent-wise, they're very similar. Even Kansas City, very similar. But it's almost like, and I'm not rooting for this unless I had a crystal ball, but it's okay if the Bills don't win the division as long as they
Correct.
make the playoffs, because I can see them having a chip on their shoulder, maybe having some relief and chip on their shoulder from maybe even being a slight underdog, going to Miami and just putting one of those games together that gets it done.
With only one bye
said
now,
it,
with only one bye,
yeah,
the regular season has become less meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
When it was in the 90s, there was 2 byes.
Yeah.
So the second seed was huge. The second seed now, the Bills have been the second seed a couple times now, and it gave them nothing. You know, they were the second seed last year and lost at home.
Mm-hmm.
They were the second seed, and they got to the AFC Championship game and lost to Kansas City. I feel like the Dolphins are going to probably win the division. That's just my own personal opinion and feeling. I think the Dolphins win the division. I think the Bills get in. And like Steve Tasker said, all you got to do is get in.
Yeah.
You got to get in the tournament, and home field means less and less. And frankly, I think the Bills sometimes play better when it's not bad weather. You know, like that Cincinnati game, there was snow, and I'll tell you what, the Bills looked way more uncomfortable than Cincinnati did.
Yeah.
So that's my call, and I'm glad I beat you to it, and hopefully we come back to this. I think the Bills play in Miami for the AFC Championship game. That would be quite something if this rivalry can mirror those rivalries of 35 years ago.
That would be a biggie, a big similarity. Yeah.
Okay, hopefully everybody really enjoyed this episode. Please like and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube. It means a lot for the YouTube algorithm, and it lets everybody know that we're there and searchable. So next week we're going to have the countdown of the 30 most interesting defensive backs in Bills history, and we could talk about how the Bills have spent about 1,000 first-round picks on corners and safeties over Don's career with the team.
And we're going to talk to a punter in coming weeks that
best player of the Bills drought era, in my opinion.
Yep. I'd like to ask him how he found out about that. So,
all right. Everybody, take care.